This evening, I am honored to welcome Dr. Barbara Ehrenreich. She joins us to discuss her latest book, Bright-Sided: How the Relentless Promotion of Positive Thinking Has Undermined America. Bright-Sided presents Dr. Ehrenreich's belief that much of what's wrong in America is rooted in our addiction to positive thinking. In this scathing and very lucid book, she takes on what she calls the, quote, inescapable pseudoscientific flapdoodle that permeates our culture in the form of life coaches, preachers, and even CEOs at the heart of the mortgage crisis. Kirkus, in a starred review, hails the book as bright, incisive, provocative thinking from a top-notch nonfiction writer. And Booklist calls it a wide-ranging and stinging look at the pervasiveness of positive thinking. Whew, that's hard. Pervasiveness of positive thinking, wherein Ehrenreich warns us against a reckless optimism that causes individuals and nations not to plan for inevitable downturns and disasters. Dr. Ehrenreich has been defined in many, many ways. She's been called passionate, funny, salacious, a premier reporter from the underside of capitalism, and my personal favorite, the soulmate of Jonathan Swift. Barbara Ehrenreich is a social critic, activist, and highly regarded investigative journalist, and also knows a thing or two about molecular and cellular biology. She's the author of 16 books, including the New York Times bestsellers Nickel and Dimed and Bait and Switch. She's also the author of Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy, lest you think all of her books have a somewhat negative slant. A frequent contributor to Harper's and The Nation, she's also been a columnist at the New York Times, Time magazines, as well as Mother Jones, Miss Magazine, and others. Her work has also appeared in the progressive Salon.com and Atlantic Monthly. In 2006, Dr. Ehrenreich founded United Professionals, a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization that you can learn more about at unitedprofessionals.org. And you can also find more of Barbara Ehrenreich's work on her blog online at barbaraehrenreich.com. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this cool fall evening. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Ehrenreich.
Thank you. No more of this doctor stuff, all right? It's just Barbara. Now, it does seem a little odd to be speaking out against positive thinking. And I had a hard time, as I've been working on this book, explaining to people what I was doing. It sounds so twisted and mean, like taking a stand against peace or motherhood or Ellen DeGeneres. I hate positive thinking. So let me explain. I am not against having a nice day, or smiling at strangers, or partying, or anything like that. In fact, as mentioned, I wrote a book about joy called Dancing in the Streets, right? So, okay, I'm not a sourpuss. The new book is about the ideology of positive thinking, the idea which has been so prevalent in our culture that we barely even notice it, that you have to be positive, you have to be cheerful, you have to be upbeat, and if you're not already that way, you better work on it. And believe me, there are the books and the DVDs and everything to help you work on it. In fact, since we're near Harvard, any Harvard people here, any form? Yeah, well, Harvard, in 2006, the most popular undergraduate course was called Positive Psychology, on how to be happier. And the students wrote gratitude letters. They didn't have to send them, they just had to write them. And, thought about things that made them happy a lot. And they actually got credit for this. But I first encountered this ideology, it was 8 years ago. I was being treated for breast cancer. I felt scared. I felt very angry. Angry for, several reasons. What's with this breast cancer epidemic? Nobody knows what causes it. And also, why are the treatments so barbaric? It's the treatments that you really suffer from. So my very first thought, of course, as a, old-time second-wave feminist, was to reach out for support, from other women who were going through or had been through the same thing. On the internet, or sending for books, and books by doctors, by breast cancer sufferers, and so on. But what I found was not support, was not what I was looking for at all. First, there's the pink ribbon thing. Now, I don't know, but I had trouble with. Now, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We're all supposed to be really, into the pink thing this month. I could not get into the pink thing. I don't know what's wrong, especially when I began to find all the ads for pink breast cancer teddy bears. And that really had a profound existential effect on me. I realized I am not afraid to die, but I am not going into the last good night with a teddy bear tucked under my arm. A very important realization. And then there's another thing that goes on, particularly with breast cancer, but I've been told since, just in the last few days, as I talk to people about this, applies to some other cancers, is infantilization of the patient. And I found out that there was a breast cancer foundation in New York City that was giving a tote bag full of gifts to women who were undergoing treatment. Nice, I managed to get hold of one of these tote bags. In it were there were some cheap jewelry, there were some moisturizers, there were, some little cosmetic type things. And there was a box of crayons. So I called the foundation and I said, this is really nice what you're doing, but what's with the crayons? And the lady who I had been put on to speak to said, well, that's in case you have anything you want to write down or jot down about your experience. I said, I'm a writer. We don't use crayons. And it's just, men are treated with somewhat more dignity. At least when they're diagnosed with prostate cancer, they're not given gifts of Matchbox cars, box cars. So the other thing I found as I entered this pink ribbon culture was a kind of mandatory optimism. The constant advice, in fact, exhortations to be positive about the disease, to think of this, in fact, as a growth experience, as a chance, that you were going to come out of this with being more evolved and more spiritual and sensitive. And I have to say, I just got nastier as a result of this disease. But anyway, in fact, it goes so far, this sort of bright siding of cancer, that you're expected to think of it not as a problem, not even as an annoyance, but as a gift. There's a book called The Gift of Cancer, A Call to Awakening, which tells you that cancer is your passport to the life you were truly meant to live. And there's even a T-shirt you can order right now that says on it, "Thank you, cancer." Almost enough to make you want to go and get an injection of live cancer cells or something. I did not feel grateful. That's not how I felt at all. All I could think of is, if cancer is your idea of a gift, take me off your Christmas list, please. So, at one point, I even, as an experiment, posted a statement on the Komen Foundation's message board. The Komen Foundation is the nation's largest breast cancer fundraising organization, and they, the people behind most of the runs and the walks for the cure. And so I posted something under the subject line, angry. Said I was angry that nobody knew what causes the disease. I was angry about the treatments being so debilitating. And I also felt that the pink ribbon stuff trivialized the whole issue. Well, I got responses like this one from a woman who said, "Barb, you need to run, not walk, to get some counseling." That this is not permissible to be negative. I have since learned, in fact, that in the last couple of years, some breast cancer support groups have actually expelled women whose cancer has metastasized. You know why? Because it would be a downer for everybody else. You don't want that around. Everybody's supposed to keep in this good mood, because the dogma has been that this positive attitude is essential to recovery, that that's what's going to pull you out of it. And that's certainly, that's been applied to just about any kind of cancer and to many other illnesses too. So, I've done some research then, and there's more information available than 8 years ago. And, how do they think a positive attitude is going to cure your cancer? Well, they think that one, it's going to boost the immune system, and two, that the immune system fights cancer. Two problems with that. One, there is no clear evidence that the immune system is responsive to your mood, unless it's extreme stress. Enough laboratory animals have been tortured in labs to discover that if a creature is stressed out enough, it gets sick. All right, we know that. But the other side, that if you're just happier, does not mean that you're going to get better. There is, more importantly, though, no evidence that the immune system fights cancer. Think about it. I mean, cancer these are your own cells. The immune system exists to fight foreign material that comes into the body, microbes that come into the body. So it doesn't recognize most cancer cells as foreign at all. More to the point, we now have big studies, some of them done by a new friend of mine, new from working on this book, James Coyne at the University of Pennsylvania, that has shown, that people who have these better attitudes, supposedly, are no more likely to survive breast cancer, neck cancer, throat cancer, or lung cancer. But there I was in 2001 being told essentially, if I didn't recover, it was going to be my own fault, right? I hadn't worked on my attitude enough. That was my first encounter with mandatory positive thinking, and I kind of put it out of my mind for a while. It seemed, maybe it's just part of the weird breast cancer cult we have going in this country. But I have since found that it is pretty much ubiquitous in American culture. There is no kind of problem in which you will not find that the advice is to just change your way of thinking, change your attitude. Don't have enough money, for example, a widespread problem today. There are hundreds of self-help books, DVDs, and things to tell you how you can attract money to yourself with your thoughts. A method that is supposedly so reliable that you are encouraged to begin spending it right now. Why has wealth eluded you so far? Well, things like low wages or unemployment and medical bills, those are excuses. The trouble is in your own mind. You have blockages to the idea of wealth. So there's so many things you could do to upgrade your positive thinking, all of which take some money from you. You might, if you had a lot of money, go on a weekend retreat in an exotic location with a really heavy-hitting motivational speaker like Tony Robbins. Of course, there's that sad case last week where some people were it was a $9,000 weekend in Sedona, Arizona, with a motivational speaker, and they were all packed into a sweat lodge, which for some reason had some toxins in the atmosphere, and 2 of them died, and about 12 others were made sick. Not positive thoughts notwithstanding. Or if you don't have that kind of money, and you can just read a book, or you can get inspirational posters. There's a company called Successories that manufactures nothing but inspirational tchotchkes, to put on your desk and in your office and on the walls. Most recently, there is a canny retailer who has invented, I don't know if you've seen these, the Life is Good line of products. I have nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong with that proposition. But you have to wonder about the person who feels they have to assert that on the tire cover on the back of their Jeep. Life is good. I was, oddly enough, I was in the grocery line the other day and noticed a man behind me was wearing a T-shirt saying, "Life is crap." And I thought, my man, Now, this is not entirely voluntary. It would be another thing if this were all voluntary. You know, there are people making money off of it, and there are people deciding to buy all of this stuff. But there are ways in which it is imposed on people, especially at the workplace. Starting in the late 80s and moving, increasing up to about 2008, there are conscious efforts on the part of top management to induce positive thinking, especially in the white-collar workforce. And that means bringing in the motivational speakers, distributing the positive thinking books for free to your workers. And all of this I link in my research to the onset of the era of downsizing in American corporations. That was the attraction to management, because when you're laying off a bunch of people, then you send them to the outplacement firm where they get pep talks on how this is really not a bad thing that's happening to them at all, being laid off. It's actually a great opportunity they're going to be grateful for someday. Sound familiar here? And the other thing is that you have people left behind who survived the layoff. How do you extract the most work for them when they know how disposable they really are as a result of the layoff? So you bring in motivational speakers for them. You send them on little retreats or outward bound expeditions so that they can, completely rethink their attitude. So this, it's very widespread, and you can see, the parallel here between the layoffs and the people with cancer is you take a person who's at some kind of crisis in their lives, either from a disease or spiraling down toward poverty as a result of job loss, and you tell them it's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity for change, for deeper spirituality, for well, they don't say character development. That's too old-fashioned. But you try to turn it into a good thing. You also tell them at the same time that the cure for whatever bad happened to them is going to be positive thinking, whether it's cancer or whether you're looking for a job. Over and over again, you will be told it's not your skills that matter. It's not what you know or on your resume. It's your attitude. You have to beam out a positive attitude. But the biggest incentive to think positively probably is not, quite so coercive, but is this idea that you can attract good things to yourself with your thoughts. Visualize what you want, and it will come to you. Recite affirmations, saying that you're going to get it and you're going to overcome all obstacles, you're going to get better, you're going to land this terrific job, and it will happen to you. This was the premise of the mega bestseller in 2006 called The Secret. Anybody here read The Secret? Then you feel embarrassed, but you did, right? Somebody read this book. It was a book and a DVD, and it's all about attracting stuff to yourself with your thoughts. Like there's a woman in the book, one of the examples is admires a necklace in a jewelry store window, and she manages to draw it to herself by thought alone. There's another woman who wants to find a boyfriend or a husband, so she empties out one of her bedroom closets, and she just moves stuff in her garage so there's room for another car. In other words, she visualizes his existence, and sure enough, poor guy gets dragged into this attraction. I'll even share with you how to get rich. It's a shame to keep these kinds of secrets. This is from another book, not The Secret, but it's called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. And if you want to get the money you really deserve, put your hand, I'm quoting now, place your hand on your heart and say, I admire rich people. I bless rich people. I love rich people. And I'm going to be one of those rich people too. And do that often enough, and it'll happen to you. Or if you're a Christian evangelical, you might want to use God as an intermediary in attracting whatever you want. And it's interesting that this trend in Christianity, in evangelical Christianity, I think at this point far overshadows the fire and brimstone fundamentalism of the Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson types. This is the new Christianity of megachurches in America, is that you can have whatever you want. God wants to, quote, prosper you if you will let him. And so you don't even have to pray. You just thank him in advance. And Joel Osteen is, the most popular preacher probably in America, heads up the largest megachurch in America. And he, in his books, tells all the things the Lord has done for him. Like he just has to say, God, thank you for getting me the best parking space in this lot. And he's got it. Tables in restaurants, whatever. He thanks the Lord and he gets them. Now, you may be wondering, well, so what's wrong with this? I mean, what's wrong with thinking positively? What's wrong of thinking, even if there's no basis for that idea that you're going to get the best job and you're going to recover or whatever? Why not live with the comforting delusion that everything is going well and that God exists to serve your most petty needs, etc.? Well, there are two big things wrong with this, and I may be a little old-fashioned here, but I think delusion is always dangerous. It is a mistake to delude yourself. And I think the biggest example of that in our society has been the financial meltdown of '08. Many things contributed to that meltdown, and I'm not giving a full kind of analysis at all. But one thing that nobody else has really pointed out is this mandatory optimism that had permeated the corporate world. And also the economists. I mean, there were very few economists, I could probably name them all, in one breath, who said there might be a problem, that things might be very unstable. Mostly they said housing prices will go up forever, stock prices will go up forever. There was a book in the early part of this decade saying it was called Dow 36,000. Nothing wrong could happen. And also on the part of many ordinary people, there was this idea, often propagated by Oprah, propagated by the prosperity preachers, that God would back you up if you took on heavy debts. And if you'd never been able to get any credit before because of your credit history or your race or whatever, then, God was stepping in to bless you when along came this mortgage that didn't require a down payment or any proof of income or anything else. But mostly, I think the big problem was within the top echelons of the corporate culture themselves. They had been taken over by positive thinking, not just as a tool for controlling people being laid off or something, but as what the corporate world should be like. It was, a bad thing to be a negative person. To be negative was to be marked for dismissal. Has anybody here ever been told at work they're too negative? Yeah. All right. And that you have to become more positive and chirpy and everyone. Well, being negative might mean just raising a question. Like, I think don't we have a little bit too much subprime exposure in this bank? Or for a very poignant example, Lehman Brothers, remember them? The man who was in charge of their real estate division in 2006 went to the CEO, Richard Fuld, and said he thought what was happening with housing prices was a bubble, and they better change their business plan fast. So he gets fired for saying this. Because who wants somebody around like that? It's like the person who's metastasized in the breast cancer group. You don't want anybody who'll bring you down. And that, created this sort of bubble where it was not possible to see what was coming. people who tried to say something were culled out. My other big problem with this ideology of positive thinking is it's cruel. I think it's especially clear, when somebody is suffering through something very difficult, and you just tell them to put on a smiley face and get over it and move on, or don't be a downer at work. I think that's cruel. Do we have an empathy deficit in this country or something? If someone is bereaved or ill, nobody wants to hear from them. They're called a whiner, a complainer, and nobody wants to be a whiner or a victim, right? That we all have to perform, put forth this positive performance. And there are people, for example, in the cancer world, who are beginning to speak up now and say, this is an additional burden for a very sick person. It's like having a second disease. You got to work on your attitude, or else you could, die. The author of The Secret, when the tsunami happened in 2006, she, said that those people, the victims, were probably sending out tsunami-shaped vibrations into the universe. And that's what brought it down on them. It's complete victim blaming. Now, I want to emphasize that the alternative to positive thinking is not negative thinking. That can be just as delusional. To go around thinking everything is going to turn out badly, that nothing is ever going to be any fun, that's also delusional. I have a very radical alternative to both, and that's called realism. Just, remember when Karl Rove put down the reality-based community? Well, there are a few of us have remained in this sort of reality-based subculture all along, or tried to hold it up. And trying to get at the truth of the situation. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying that, it's completely obvious. But to try to understand it as best we can and see what we can do about the problems and the threats and the obstacles. I had somebody on the right on the internet, a criticism of my book, Bright-Sided, saying, well, all she talks about is she wants realism. That won't make you happy. Not necessarily, but I can guarantee there will be no happiness without it. Because what are the major things causing human suffering? Well, I'll throw out the one that, as preoccupied me for so many years, and that is poverty. And you have to start with that. Not say, oh, well, the poor, they just have bad attitudes, and they could just change their attitudes. And there is a whole industry, by the way, in uplifting their attitudes. But to address the actual circumstances that are causing it, which means politics, which means an agenda, which means creating social movements. What I have to say about happiness, the last thing I'll say right now, is my own personal secret of happiness is we may not be able to bring about all the changes we need to in the world, but we can have a good time trying. Thank you. There are a lot of studies purporting to show that a positive attitude has effects on longevity or health or something. And I have looked at all these very carefully, brought out my rusty PhD in cellular immunology, by the way, and I'm not convinced by them. There's just as much on the other side. As for the immune system, I've seen a study that was heralded as saying, the immune cells are activated. It's wonderful. They're activated by being positive. She repeated the experiments, didn't work a year later. It's a mess. I mean, I could give you more examples of very dubious studies about longevity and supposedly positive attitudes or self-reported happiness or something. So that's one of the things my book takes on. I am not convinced by those. I think they've been hyped. And I think it's partly, well, it's partly because psychologists need, have a career problem. Once antidepressants came in and a general practitioner could prescribe them, what were psychologists going to do? And anybody here who is a psychologist knows that it's a problem. And so what they began to get into beginning in about 1998 was saying, well, we won't treat the sick. Nobody wants us to do that anyway. We're going to treat ordinary people and make them more positive. And that's positive psychology. He's asking how much did the New Thought movement of the 19th century feed into this? I have never encountered anybody in an audience I was speaking to had ever heard of the New Thought movement. This is exciting. But yeah, I have a whole chapter on that because this is a very American phenomenon. And it's easily traceable back to some very interesting independent thinkers in the mid-19th century. People like Phineas Parker Quimby, who was a watchmaker in Portland, Maine, and Mary Baker Eddy, who neither of these were people with any formal education, but they were rebelling against the dominant Calvinism of their time. The idea that we are all wretched sinners and will probably spend eternity in hell. And that was an idea that was making people like Mary Baker Eddy literally sick. With a kind of invalidism was an epidemic in America. And they, had, I think, the independence of mind to say, hey, no, let's not think that way anymore. Maybe God doesn't hate us. Maybe there are opportunities and everything. And so I'm very sympathetic to the origins of this. Ralph Waldo Emerson was another of this ilk. William James, to an extent. But in the 20th century, it sort of begins to fuse with all of this, these get-rich-quick schemes and medical quackery, which certainly was involved in the 19th century too. But I was fascinated by that history. They were let go, yeah. Yeah, who was the general who said we can't do this without, so many more, I can't remember. So he gets fired, he gets demoted or shoved off. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned it. I don't go into it in any great length, but George W. Bush was the most optimistic president since Reagan. And there's a distinction. And Clinton was pretty bad in this way too. But Bush, had been a cheerleader in college. And I think that's how he saw his role as president, was just to beam optimism at all times. So, Iraq would be a cakewalk, well into late 2000 and, into 2008 even. He was saying the economy is fundamentally sound, etc. 2008, could that have been? No, into, late 2007. So, yeah, it was and Condi Rice said, in an interview at one point that she had doubts about Iraq. Well, thank you, Connie, for telling us that now. But that Bush really could not stand to have pessimists around him. So you had this kind of yes-man groupthink culture in the public sector as well as the private. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't talk about that, but it's really kind of depressing, the happy endings all the time, that you can easily predict by the middle of the film. And that's part, this is our international reputation. That we're kind of naive, a little bit foolish, and insist on this artificial optimism at all times. And I think to a certain extent Americans have prided themselves on that too. But I think we could overcome it. I don't know if there is a connection between what has happened to college education and in general and Paddott's thinking. My own feeling, and I hesitate to say it in the vicinity of such an august institution, is that to a certain extent higher education has become very scam-like. You want a job, all right, we can't guarantee you'll ever get one, but we can give you the lottery ticket if you pay enough to put you in debt for years and years and years. And this is not working for people. I mean, our economy is not generating, and was even well before the recession, was not generating enough jobs for college-educated people, for the number that we have. Now, it doesn't make me think that college education is a bad idea, because, I think it's great. Go study number theory, Hungarian medieval history, anything. It's fascinating. But it's been sold as a complete practicality, as a credential that will get you a job. And it doesn't work. Well, actually the recovery rates have not improved very much since the 1950s. So it's, it's heartbreaking to say that. But I think that breast cancer was really stigmatized. Remember some of us will be old enough to remember what a big deal it was when Betty Ford went public and said she had the disease. Because it used to be unmentionable. So obituaries would just say that so-and-so died after a long illness. It was, shameful or something. So I think that part of the awareness campaign is good. Getting past the stigma, being able to talk about it and recognize it. But then something else went on with breast cancer, which is it turned into a very important part of corporate branding. That is a way a corporation signals to consumers that it's woman-friendly. I can't tell you how many things have pink ribbons on them. Oh God, what was some of the most recent examples I have seen? I mean, just got, in a supermarket. Campbell's Soup has pink ribbons. Oh, give me a break. Okay. So it's sort of they got carried away with destigmatizing, in other words, and it went along with this positive thinking stuff. She said she's taking issue with me. She's saying we do have a choice in how we respond to circumstances, although we do not cause those circumstances. She's not into the law of attraction, right? And we do have a choice in, to be sort of defeated or to be positive and optimistic in how we handle things as they come along. Okay, I'm not going to disagree with you. I've thought of writing a self-help book, how I snarled my way through breast cancer, pushing back. I don't think that, how everybody works, and that would be silly to do. We shouldn't impose moods on people or something like that. What is often missing is listening to where they're really at. And I have heard from so many people who talked about losing a loved one, like a spouse or a parent, everybody knew was dying for months and months, but you were not allowed to say that. And the dying person was increasingly isolated in a way, because they had to keep up this mask of complete optimism. In other words, we're not allowing. It's very threatening, in fact, to get in touch with those feelings in another person even.